Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. This panel is campaigning for a sustainable job guarantee in Australia. And our three amazing speakers tonight are Cassy O'Connor MP, leader of the Greens Party in Tasmania, Dr. Heather Holmes-Ross, Mayor of the City of Mitcham in South Australia, and Desiree Kai, who's the organising lead with the Tomorrow Movement, young people campaigning for a climate jobs guarantee. So my name's Gabby, and I'll be chairing this discussion tonight. Before we start, I want to acknowledge that I'm joining you from the land of the Kaurna people, the traditional custodians of the Adelaide Plains where I live and work. I want to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge that this land was stolen and never ceded. I'd also like to mention Stephen Hale is joining us as our panel's technical moderator. Stephen's an MMT economist and was recently appointed as an associate professor at Torrens University. So our first speaker tonight is Cassy O'Connor. Cassy is an elected member of and the leader of the Tasmanian Greens. Before being elected to state parliament, Cassy was a journalist, community activist, and an environmental campaigner. She ran for office first in 2008. In 2010, Cassy became the first Greens female MP nationally to serve in a cabinet position when she was made cabinet secretary in the Labor Greens power sharing government. She later became the first Greens female minister when she was sworn in as Minister for Human Services, Community Development, Aboriginal Affairs and Climate Change. Very, very important portfolios. Cassy works for genuine climate action, a fair society, a prosperous low-carbon economy, the protection of forests and wilderness, and landscape restoration. So all of those things are very important when we're talking about a job guarantee. And I'd like to just make this introduction a little bit longer than usual because I also want to share something fantastic that Cassy has achieved. So hopefully you don't mind me speaking for a little bit longer. Just over a year ago, Cassy introduced a motion asking the government to investigate the concept of a job guarantee for Tasmania. He pointed to the need for Australia to return to a policy of full employment and highlighted the intergenerational poverty and disadvantage resulting from the disempowerment and isolation of too many people who are denied meaningful work. And this motion passed by one vote, even with a Conservative government in power at the time. And this is what Cassy said in her media release afterwards. And I'd just like to read it because it's something that I find really inspiring. So Cassy said after the motion passed, "We're proud to see our job guarantee motion pass Parliament this evening. We look forward to the government's next step on the investigation in how a jobs guarantee program could be adopted in Tasmania to strengthen the state's COVID-19 recovery and support economic transition to tackle the climate emergency. The economic shockwaves from COVID-19 will continue for years, and it is critical that government does everything within its power to ensure everyone possible has a job. Following the Second World War, the Australian government committed to a policy of full employment. In times of crisis, that's what responsible governments do. Unemployment and underemployment were already significant ongoing issues prior to the pandemic. The majority of unemployed and underemployed people are in hard circumstances through no fault of their own. Reliable and livable income is essential to meet the basic needs like food, housing, healthcare, transport, bills, and education. Work opportunities benefit individuals, society, and the economy as a whole. We know dealing with the colliding challenges of the climate emergency, long-term disadvantage, and the impact of coronavirus will require ambitious government action. This is the work as a result of tonight's vote that will begin. So thank you very much for bearing with me. I really just did want to read that because I think it's a fantastic achievement, and I'd like to hand over to Cassy to talk about some of the work that she's been doing.
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction, Gabrielle. I feel like you've sort of said it all. I want to acknowledge that I'm here on the land of the Muwinina people who were Aboriginal Tasmanians before the arrival of the English in 1803. The Muwinina people are no longer with us. I want to acknowledge the warriors of the Palawa Pakana people, their struggle to defend their country, and to acknowledge their enduring culture, identity, and connection to country today. I also, this island that I'm going to talk to you a little bit about tonight has a human story that dates back some 50,000 years or more. And everywhere you look in Tasmania, when you know what you're looking for, you can see that this is an Aboriginal landscape, and you can see the signs of that deep connection. But ever since the arrival of the English in 1803, we had a colonial administration that went to war with Aboriginal people, nearly wiped them out, and went to war with nature. And that ongoing detachment from and assault on nature, it continues to this day, which is why in Tasmania you have a proud Aboriginal movement that's working towards reconnection with country. You have civil society and the conservation movement who've been basically on guard for a very long time. And we've had Greens in the Tasmanian Parliament for the past 38 years. Just a little bit about this beautiful island. It's a little green heart-shaped island at the bottom of Australia. It's an archipelago that's made up of some 334 islands. It's kissed by the Pacific Ocean, the Southern Ocean, and the Indian Ocean. We're the home to the world's tallest flowering plant, the largest tract of temperate rainforest in the Southern Hemisphere. So we have this incredible natural beauty here, and we're an island of contradictions because so much of our economy is dependent on the clean green brand that underpins agriculture and tourism here, but we have this historically an economy that's very dependent on resource extraction. So we as Greens recognise that you need to have a rethink about what work means. You need to acknowledge that this is the UN decade of ecosystem restoration. So we have these imperatives of accelerating global heating, the loss of biodiversity, raging social inequality, racial injustice. And it's pretty clear to particularly young people that we're going to have to break and remake the economic system so that we've got a chance of handing on a habitable planet, not only to our children and grandchildren, but to all life on Earth. So I just wanted to share a few pictures with you, if I get this right, Gabby, of Tasmania. Hang on, just wait. Window. Can you see that, Gabby?
Just give it a few seconds. It usually takes just a little while to come through.
How do I go back?
You can click the screen share thing again if it didn't work.
It's not working?
Not yet. Do you want to try again?
Yeah, I'm happy to try again, but I'm not very good at this stuff.
That's totally fine.
Are you able to help me with the screen?
Yep, sure. Do you want me to just share your presentation?
Yeah, thanks.
Yep, there we go. How's that? Is it coming up?
Great, that's the front page.
Fantastic. You just tell me when to click.
Okay, if you click now, that'd be great. There we are. There's an account in the massive carbon bank that is Tasmania. That's in the Tarkine rainforest in the northwest of Tasmania, and it's part of the reason that so many of us fight so hard to defend this beautiful island. Next slide, Gabby.
Yeah.
This is Nipaluna, Hobart, the capital city of Lutruwita, Tasmania. I share that just to show you what a beautiful place it is. Next slide. Thanks, Gabby. And again, this is a forest that's in the northwest of Tasmania. It's unlike any forest anywhere in the world. It's basically a lot of it is relic Gondwanan forest. And what makes our forest quite different from anywhere else is that in time, our eucalypt forests become rainforests, and you don't see that in other parts of Australia. So they're definitely something that's worth defending. So we moved for a job guarantee for Parliament to call on the Treasurer of the day to investigate how a job guarantee would work in Tasmania. In a state that's heavily dependent on resource extraction, you have an economic system that's very boom and bust. And we also have here low levels of educational attainment, high levels of illiteracy, high levels of dependence on Commonwealth income support. We've also got rising housing insecurity and homelessness, particularly amongst young people. Socially, we've got the oldest and fastest ageing population in Australia with the highest level of disability. And just by the by, we're also the nation's highest per capita givers, even though we're one of the poorest states. So again, we're this beautiful bundle of goodness and contradictions. So we think that Tasmania is the perfect petri dish for testing and refining good policy, like a job guarantee that would underpin a green recovery from COVID. And we think that it could set Tasmania up to be seen as the science restoration capital of the world. And again, this ties in with the UN Decade of Ecosystem Restoration. So we put forward a motion to the Tasmanian Parliament, which, Gabby, if you go through to the next slide, basically, and I don't know, I won't read all of it out, but the motion acknowledges the economic shockwaves of COVID, acknowledges the reality of insecure work and particular impacts on young people, and the whole of the Parliament calls on the Premier, who's also the Treasurer, to ask his department to undertake work on what basically a job guarantee would look like in Tasmania. We are particularly focused on how that might look for young people, and obviously a job guarantee, because it relies heavily on government investment. It ultimately needs to be a national program, and Tasmania is not a wealthy state. So I'll just park that for a minute. But in an amazing parliamentary vote, because we had a very finely balanced parliament last September, we managed to have the support of the entire Parliamentary Labor Party and an independent, as well as the two Greens MPs, to get that motion through by a single vote. And we thought it was pretty amazing, really, that the Parliament had the capacity to tell the Treasurer to do this. But unfortunately, I am the bearer of bad news, because even though it was Parliament's will for this work to be undertaken as the first step towards a potential job guarantee or a youth job guarantee in Tasmania, we ended up getting very little back from the Premier and Treasurer. And it wasn't dissimilar from a letter that he wrote to Noel Pearson and Bill Mitchell after they had written to him asking that the Tasmanian government explore a job guarantee as part of the recovery from COVID. So before we had time to get back into Parliament and really take him on over it and test it again, we were sent to an election in March this year, a full year early, which was certainly a shock to the system. But being the Greens, we got up and we went for it. And so because we knew, as a result of our connections to young people and to activists groups, that tying the security of a job guarantee to the action that leads to hope amongst young people in tackling the climate and biodiversity crisis, we know this is excellent policy. And because we'd had the guidance and the learnings from Dr. Stephen Hale and Gabby Bond, and we were briefed by Dr. Bill Mitchell, and we were in communication with Noel Pearson, and we'd done deep research. And so we knew this was good policy, we knew it resonated with young people, and we knew Tasmania could afford it, and that it was a really critical part of our platform for a Green New Deal. So, Gabby, next slide. We went to the election with a job guarantee policy that, so the elements of the policy are that we establish a job guarantee program with a guaranteed 16 hours a week at a living wage with full entitlements, including superannuation. It would initially be offered to people under the age of 19 because realistically that's what Tasmania can afford at this stage, and you could extend it out to all groups by 2030. And obviously you'd need to work with a sympathetic and visionary federal government in order to really make the program have the potential that it has. We'd establish a Tasmanian Employment Office in 2 phases, and the first would establish the programs that you'd roll out with a job guarantee, and the second roll out the job guarantee itself. And it would be fully voluntary, and it would be delivered to produce a triple bottom line benefit. And we all know what that benefit is. When people are able to secure meaningful work, have a living wage, you see enormous spin-offs in health, mental health, productivity, but also in the context of a job guarantee and a Green New Deal, you'd see the health benefits that come from being part of repairing nature. So where's the screen at, Gabby?
It's just on the green jobs and skills of the future. Can you see it?
Okay. Or? No, I can't really, but, you know, that's okay.
Can others see it?
No, I think we've lost it, Gabby.
Oh, we've lost it? Okay, I'll just go. Sorry about that. I will just share it again. Bear with me. And then.
So I'm just going to, while Gabby's getting the pictures together, I don't know, I can't see anything except a white screen.
Come in a minute.
I just wanted to talk about a few of the projects in Tasmania that you could marry with a job guarantee program. We have any number of landscape restoration projects that need to be done in Tasmania after nearly 220 years of intensive land use, poor planning and bad management. And one of them is Cunnamalooka, the Tamar River, which runs through our northern capital, Launceston, and as a result of many decades of mismanagement, the river's subject to silt, poor nutrient quality. It needs regular dredging. There's weeds all through the banks of the river. So we released a policy in the campaign that would unleash a job guarantee workforce on an holistic catchment repair task. The thing is, this is work that has to be done, and governments that delay doing it and securing the necessary workforce to do it are just putting off a problem so it becomes much worse in years to come. On the next slide, where are we, Gabby?
We have, I think we have the slide with the 2 forest pictures.
Yeah. So I know I'm talking about forests a bit, but they're such an integral part of what makes this island so amazing in the world. They are extraordinary carbon stores. And when we were in government, we undertook a body of work to assess how much carbon's sequestered in Tasmania's forests. And there's, more than 3 billion tonnes, according to that study. And so these are carbon banks that are critical to the future of life on Earth. And it's interesting because, I get around the island a bit, and there are many people beyond politics who understand the importance of these ecosystems for their intrinsic values as well as their critical importance to the climate. But next slide, Gabby.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks. Unfortunately, this is where we're at in Tasmania. So this is native forest clear felling and burning in the Florentine Valley, which is about an hour to the southwest of Nipaluna, Hobart. And this is a practice that's been going on this island for close to 40 years. And it is causing massive loss of habitat, changes to landscape ecology, loss of our beautiful eucalyptus regnans, damage to the water table, and enormous social division. So this is the sort of repair work that we'd like to see a job guarantee workforce being pointed towards, because the restoration task here is significant. At the moment, Tasmania exports around 1 million tonnes of native forest wood chip, mostly to China, where they don't require forest stewardship certification. So landscape repair through carbon farming and repair of these sorts of ecosystems is critical. But the next one is one of the good news stories of restoration locally. So this is a place on Tasmania's east coast at Scamander, and the picture at the top is a former pine plantation post-harvesting. And about 16 years ago, one of the locals, this incredible person called Todd Dudley, established the Northeast Bioregional Network, and they went to the logging company and asked if they could be given the opportunity basically to restore that forest. And so what we have now at the first stage of the skyline tier restoration is about 350 hectares of forest that's coming back. And Gabby, if you wouldn't mind just going to the next slide. Sure. Now we've got a baby forest, and you can see in the background of that image the next project that you'd want to unleash a job guarantee workforce on. Some of the labour that helped to restore skyline tier to this point was from the old Green Army. There was also some people were paid to undertake this work through funds that were raised, and there were a whole lot of amazing volunteers. And when they did a study on that, on what had happened there, all the radiata pines were gone, and in their place were blue gum, black gum, stringy bark, iron bark, white gum, peppermint, and lovely little plants no one would really have heard of except for the Tasmanians who might be watching: hairy pennywort, the woolly crossherb, the dolly bush and the musk daisy bush, the native cranberry, the native primrose, and on it goes. So you can see here that nature has an extraordinary capacity to heal itself with a bit of help from its friends. We know there's a huge task to be done. We know that when young people are striking for climate, what they want to see is projects like this in action, and what they're actually scared of is not people telling the truth about the science. They're actually scared of a lack of leadership on climate, and they really do want to be part of the solutions, because it's a really simple equation on climate: action equals hope. And that's why we will persist in moving Tasmania towards trialling, at the very least, a youth job guarantee. Governments come and governments go. but the Greens have been in the Tasmanian Parliament for the past 38 years. And what we've seen just in this last state budget is a Conservative government adopt our policies around energy efficiency rollouts in public housing, solar in schools, electrification of the vehicle fleet, a container deposit scheme. So we know that a youth job guarantee for Tasmania is excellent policy. It fits the times that we're in. It links in with the UN Decade of Ecosystem Restoration. It acknowledges that around 10% of young Tasmanians right now are unemployed, and it also acknowledges that you need to rethink the way labour, L-A-B-O-U-R, is understood, so that governments are not only prepared to pay people to undertake public good work, they actually embrace it because they can see that it has so many triple bottom line benefits. So we'll be back. We know that the Premier has done the wrong thing here, but we will persist. So thank you for listening, everyone.
Thank you so much. I'll just stop my screen share. Hopefully that's unshared. Those images were really thought-provoking. The one with the kind of the view through the trees that we paused on there at the end, that's really like a metaphor in a photo, isn't it? So you can see, you know, the past and the future and the past. Yeah, fantastic.
It's what's possible.
Yeah, that's really terrific. Thank you. I'll just check because I haven't had a look in the chat there, but there is a couple of comments. There's one from, would you like to pause for questions now before we go on to the next speaker?
I'm easy. I'm in the hands of the panel.
Okay.
There are some questions on the Q&A.
There are some questions. Vishnu said hello. He's online. There's a question from David. So he's talking about the job guarantee as something that will rise and fall with the economic cycle. However, greening and repairing and maintaining ecosystems is a permanent job that will need to be ongoing. So wondering what your thoughts are on.
Well, my understanding of the way a well-designed job guarantee program would work is that it actually buffers us through the ups and downs in economic cycles. It's how you get back to that, I think, responsibility as a society that we have that's reflected through democratically elected governments, that principle of full employment. So I actually, I don't see a job guarantee as a temporary program, and I totally agree with David about the need to, have a much better relationship with the natural world and be able to live in harmony with it and respect the intrinsic right of life on earth to exist. But I really do think a job guarantee in the future economy will be essential, because we're seeing automation through Tasmania's mining industry, in aquaculture, agriculture. I think the rise of automation and the rising popularity of policy like a job guarantee are connected.
Excellent. There is a question here from Noel in the Philippines, a University of the Philippines. Noel has asked, speakers in other panels have pointed out that the democratisation of work is the first step, a precondition of decarbonisation. Would you agree with that, or do you think the decarbonisation needs to come first, or perhaps both at the same time?
Well, I'm always worried when we say we have to do, one thing or the other. We've just had the IPCC's latest report out about 6 weeks ago, and we're in a code red for humanity, and so the carbonisation actually needed to start 30 years ago. So we have a huge amount of catch up to do, and we need to, I think, on the democratisation aspect of it, it's democratising work is really important, but you can't disaggregate it from the health or otherwise of democracy. And we're actually seeing in the 21st century not just a struggle between people wanting climate action and the fossil fuel lobby and their political enablers. We're actually seeing a struggle between fascism and democracy, or authoritarianism and democracy. So the disempowerment of workers is a foundation stone of predator capitalism. So I think we have to be doing it full bore, both at the same time, because we don't have time. We just don't have time to get things perfect. We just have to go hard.
Yeah, I see nodding heads. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think I tend to agree. There's really no benefit to be gained for holding one thing back while we work out the other thing. We just have to do our best.
Multi-skill.
Yeah. So there's a couple of other really good comments and questions, which I might sort of round up towards the end, see how we go. But I think I should introduce our next speaker, Dr. Heather Holmes-Ross. So Heather is with us tonight. Thank you very much, Heather, for coming online. Heather is the Mayor of the City of Mitcham, which one might argue is one of Australia's most progressive local governments. Heather comes from a small business and sustainability background. She was previously the owner of an award-winning cafe called the Artisan Cafe and founder of the Totally Locally Blackwood movement. And she was also a research scientist at Flinders University. In her role as Mayor, Heather is committed to reducing the environmental footprint of the whole of the City of Mitcham via initiatives like working towards a city's target of zero waste, becoming a 100% solar-powered city, increasing the tree canopy, reducing greenhouse emissions by fixing accessibility to public transport, and prioritising cycling and pedestrian access over cars. In 2019, the City of Mitcham joined the growing movement of cities around the world declaring a climate emergency. And in October 2020, the Council endorsed 5 climate pledges and 5 community commitments under the city's power partnerships. So one of these initiatives I know is to massively increase the uptake of solar panels. But I'd like to hand over to Heather to talk about that and other great things that the Council's doing.
Thank you so much, Gabby. It's lovely to be here. Hello to everyone out there in Cyberland, and particularly any residents of the City of Mitcham that are out there. Hello, it's fantastic to see you. I'd like to acknowledge that I'm on Kaurna country and respect the ongoing spiritual relationship with country of the Kaurna people. So as Gabby said, I am the Mayor of Mitcham. We are a council of 67,000 residents in the leafy green inner suburbs of Adelaide. And I find it really interesting to be introduced as a progressive council because we're actually located in one of the most conservative electorates of South Australia. And I suppose that's one of the beauties of local government in South Australia is it's non-politically aligned. And so you can end up getting a forward-thinking council in a very conservative area. But I'm still worried that I would have residents that would curl up and die at the thought of being labelled progressive. So as Gabby mentioned, in October 2019, our council moved, I think, the most transformative decision of this council, which was to declare a climate emergency. And when that was moved, it was with no ties, no pledges, no goals. The idea was just to declare that we are in an emergency, and to challenge administration of the council to look at all our business as usual services through a climate change lens and see what possibilities that they could come up with. So, of course, there was already a lot of green projects underway when we made this declaration, but freeing the administration to be innovative and find solutions has been a really terrific outcome. So the question to administration was, how can we do anything better? And so I want to talk about the outcomes of that. And in doing so, I suppose, present some possibilities for the direction maybe of democratised work, or that a job guarantee might take in terms of doing things differently and to help, prepare and mitigate climate change, which is, one of the biggest challenge of our time. So I wanted to talk about three things. I wanted to talk about enhancing our urban forest, smart water design, and then clean energy initiatives that we've taken up within the city. So in terms of enhancing our urban forest, we obviously recognise that greening of the city is very important. And we are luckily a city with a high degree of canopy. We take on the hills face, which is mainly grey box woodland. And because we have that degree of canopy already, we were able to nominate as a World Tree City. And this is I believe it's through the UN. It absolutely is a United Nations type thing. And we were one of 8 cities in New Zealand and Australia to be awarded Tree Cities of the World, and one of 3 in South Australia. And the other 2, not surprisingly, are the neighbouring suburbs of Unley and Burnside. Anyway, part of this award was to show a commitment and maintenance and increase of canopy, and that's continually undermined at the moment because of the effect of urban infill in Adelaide, and I presume all urban centres, but we are being pushed very hard as councils to absorb increases in population rather than extending our urban fringes. So the result of that is that many blocks are being cleared, housing blocks or residential blocks are being cleared of all trees, and then we're having a number of residences being built there, which is all well and good, and we do need, a variation of residential possibilities, but it's having a huge effect on our canopy. And we calculated that at the rate that trees are being cleared on private land, that our annual tree planting program was nowhere near adequate. So we were planting 1,100 trees a year, and we realised that to even break even, we needed to escalate that to $1,800 trees a year. And so we put in place what we called an accelerated tree planting program, and we have been able to build that to, it took 2 years to put in motion, because you can't just go out and plant trees. You have to work out what type of trees and where you're going to plant them, and that's actually really becoming quite difficult. Where do we plant them? But we have accelerated our tree planting to this level of 1,800. But sadly, that's only going to keep us at the status quo. That's not going to increase our canopy at all. So we're pushing very hard in South Australia for changes to the new planning and design code to allow us to have some say in what happens to particularly regulated and significant, they're just big trees, on private properties. So each year, each federal and state election, we get to put forward priorities to the candidates, telling them what we would like them to spend money on when they're buying our votes. And this year, one of Mitcham's priorities has been to be able to use, or for state government to allow us to use state roads to plant trees on. So we're asking for them we'll partner with them if they will let us use their roads. What a state to be in. We would also, as a council, really like to be able to put a price on trees. The issue at the moment is it doesn't cost very much to cut down a tree, and the new planning and design code, if you are unable to plant a tree, you need to pay into a fund, and the price of a tree is $300, which is absolutely atrocious, and that money is available to councils, but that's a fifth of what it costs us to maintain a tree through its lifestyle. So we're lifetime. So it's a really sad piece of legislation, and we're working quite hard, and as we can, to lobby and advocate against that. The Tree City Award also required us to demonstrate leadership, and so we have embraced an Arbor Day event within the city, and the first one of those was in 2020, and of course we had chosen that September the 1st to be our Arbor Day, and of course it had to be a virtual event because everyone had to stay at home at that point. So what we did was we made available 300 trees to the community if they wanted to come and get them, and then we made a video showing people the best way to plant their trees, using a bit of a superstar. Kim Cirrus, who was a garden guru, made that video for us. And we had such wonderful feedback from that, and that we repeated it this year. But this year we were in a reserve up in the hills, and we had 300 children for 2 neighbouring schools, and so we were teaching them how to plant a tree, and it was quite interesting. During that process, we asked the children, "Have you ever planted a tree?" And about half of them had never planted a tree. So we spent a few hours with them, and now we have a beautifully planted reserve. So we take that quite seriously. Our leadership role in terms of trees and how important they are to us. The second thing I wanted to speak about was smart water design and investing in green infrastructure, and we really feel that we have been at the forefront of this at Mitcham. One of our great success stories is permeable footpaths. So we take great delight now wherever we can in, rather than putting a regular footpath, we try and make our footpaths permeable in order to keep the water where it falls, so to decrease the runoff. And what we're finding by doing that is that we're creating, our street trees are growing deeper roots, and they're not messing with our curbs or our footpaths as much. And so we're actually saving money because we don't have to do so much footpath and curb maintenance by having our footpaths made of they're just permeable pavers. So last year of that, we laid 25 kilometres of footpaths, and 75% or 17 kilometres of that was permeable. The other place we use permeable paving is on road intersections, and on some of our road intersections, particularly ones where we've had flooding issues in the past. And if we pave them with permeable pavers, we can, with that water again, penetrates, and we can use that then to passively irrigate the areas around the intersection. And that again, you can solve a $1 million+ intersection, the flooding of an intersection, with about $200,000. So there's a huge cost saving to doing that as well. One of our residents invented a contraption called a tree inlet a tree net inlet, and we're very proud of him, and we were the first city to uptake these tree inlets. So they're basically, they sit in the curb and they just look like a stainless steel, piece of stainless steel with a little hole in it. And what happens is, behind this inlet, you dig a hole, quite a deep hole. So we dig a hole, we fill that hole with aggregate, and then have a pipe to it from the curb, and that's covered by this lovely little inlet, which also is shaped so that it attracts the water into it rather than it running past. So when it rains, what we're doing is harvesting all the water. It's encouraged by the design to come in through this pipe and down into this deep pit. So that again is encouraging our street trees to grow incredibly deep roots rather than shallow roots, and so it makes them far more drought efficient. And we've compared trees that have had these tree net inlets next to them versus those that don't, and it's just quite amazing the difference that it makes if you can encourage the trees to have deep roots. We've also used the same type of thinking and as soakage pits and trenches, and we've put them under our, there's quite a few of them under reserves, so water from the road rather, again, than running off as stormwater we've been able to capture. And then we put a soakage pit about perhaps half a metre below a lawn in parks, and that way we can retain the greenery for far longer, and it decreases, of course, our watering costs for those. The other thing we're very proud of is our crumbed rubber roads. We've been part of a trial for roads containing quite an amount of crumbed rubber, and we've done this in partnership with Melbourne University and Tyre Stewardship. And we use, I think it's 500 tonnes of this mix, uses 750 old tyres. So it's a way of using those tyres, but also the roads. What we're finding, because we are part of this trial, is that they're far more robust. They have they're far more, what's the word, squeezable, so that you can pull them apart without them cracking. I know that flexible is the word I'm looking for. They're also very much quieter. So a road with rubber in it is a far quieter road. So what we're doing is testing the longevity of these treatments, and we're finding that they're comparable with a regular asphalt surface. So we started doing this trial with the University of Melbourne, and they were looking at the road service, and they were interested in going forward and looking at how, if we could use additional crumbed rubber to make permeable car parks or permeable spaces. So we have a trial here where we've used a car park, and we've used asphalt which has various amounts or ratios of crumbed rubber in it, and that makes it very permeable. And what we've done is we have about, I suppose, 30 different parking bays in this particular car park, and we have different ratios of crumbed rubber and also different colours. So we're contrasting black and white, and we're looking at how much water we're actually we're catching, and again how that's helping the trees that are planted close to it, and we're saving, I don't know, lots of money in the millions of dollars by using these permeable car parks and doing the testing, but saving the money on watering the oval, which is very close by. The other thing that we've got going in this particular car park is a geothermal trial. So while we were putting down the car park, another group from the University of Melbourne was wondering about heating through a car park, because of course the car park is a beautiful black absorbent surface. So what they've done is laid a series of coils underneath the car park, and then the sun shines car park black, it absorbs the heat, and that's heating the coils. And at the moment, the heat from the idea is that the heat from those coils is used, and I believe it is being used to heat the showers for the sporting club that it's next door to. But what this group is looking to do is long term is to use that heated water as a way of creating electricity, because you have your free heat, and can they use that as electricity generation? It is, isn't it?
Incredible. Such good scientific collaboration and, citizen science, even with like the testing of the different surfaces. It's so interesting and illustrative of things that work that needs doing.
The last thing we do use, we're also working with SA Water at measuring the water content of soils, particularly of our ovals, and so when it seems like a no-brainer, but we haven't all been doing it. You can water, particularly during summer, you can measure the soil content, and then if it rains, it's actually quite amazing how long that moisture stays in the soil. And so we've found that over in the heat of summer last year, we had somewhere around 20 days that we didn't need to water where we would have watered. So that's been terrific as well. And now I suppose I'd like to talk about the clean energy initiatives that we've put into place. We've had an extensive rollout of solar panels on council buildings. I became mayor about 2.5 years ago, and I was absolutely gobsmacked at the lack of solar PVs on council buildings. And so, of course, the great thing about generating your own power at council is that has a flow-on effect to every ratepayer. If we're generating our own energy, then that's saving to all our ratepayers. We've changed most of our street lights. So our council-owned streets, we've changed to LED globes, which is 80% saving on electricity. So the payoff time is not long at all. And we're transitioning our fleet to electric. We've bought 4 electric cars. We're very proud of those, but we've also installed 6 chargers around the city so that people that have transferred to or transitioned to electric have a place to charge their cars, but also to encourage people from out of town. You know, if they're stuck in our city, they can go shopping while they charge their cars. So at the moment, these are free, although we have had a little bit of feedback. Why are we providing free charging for people that are wealthy enough to buy electric cars? It's a little bit funny, I think. And I suppose the thing that I am most proud of is our community solar program. I went to the election. I campaigned on the possibility of Mitcham becoming a 100% solar city, and the idea behind that was something that was developed by a group called Carina, the idea of a revolving fund, so that council could access cheap money. So we were we had the ability to create a pool and then lend that money to people that wanted to put panels on their roofs. And so for the community at the time, there was the need to remove 3 barriers. There was the barrier of cost and the barrier of people understanding the tech, and also trust in the hardware or the software that they were buying. And so I came to council with that idea that this would be a great thing for our city if we could become 100% reliant on solar power. And then council commissioned a report, and that report showed that over 54% of our city's emissions came from electricity consumption, so that replacing the solar would have a major impact on the city's emissions. So when I had stood for election, I had just surmised it, but now we know that over 54% of our emissions comes from electricity usage. So we have recently gone to tender for a partner to help us roll out a community program across the city. And the 2 must-have deliverables are our partner must be able to deliver solar panels to any of our residents with no upfront cost. So residents or ratepayers will pay back the cost of the panels through the savings on their power bill. And the other must-have is that our partner must be able to deliver cheaper power than at the moment. So it means that, in theory, everybody in the city at no upfront cost would be able to access cheaper power. And the beauty of it is it's for everybody. It's for residents, it's for businesses, but in particular, it's for tenants and landlords, because at the moment you would know that there's no reason for a landlord to put solar on their roofs. But if it's cheap for the tenant, like if it's cheaper from day one for the tenant, then you have this whole swathe of the population that didn't ever think that they would be able to access solar power. You make it accessible for them. So the other thing that we're looking for in our tender is the chance to stimulate the local economy. We want to use local installers and suppliers, Indigenous businesses where we can. So we went to tender and said, this is our idea. World, what do you think? Mm-hmm. And the world has come back amazingly and said, we think this is an absolutely marvellous idea. We're very surprised that it's come from the local government sector, and there are many of us that are willing to work with you, not only to allow this solar, the community scheme, so not only to allow the panels to be available to people, but we would like to take it this step further. So in the end, we will create increase the storage capacity within the city, and move towards the possibility of creating a mini grid using iCloud smarts and things, so that you would have a situation where people within the city are buying and selling to each other at a far lesser rate than they would be paying out on the grid. But SA Power Networks really, really like this idea, because it would essentially take the city off grid, and that has a stabilising effect. So everybody that we have showed this to says it's a brilliant idea. I am overjoyed, because it was a kernel that I thought could work, but to see the feedback that we have had has been really satisfying. So our expression of interest closes tomorrow, and then I'll be able to bring you more news.
Mm-hmm.
So
that's fantastic. There's quite a lot of things going on in the chat. I won't summarize all of the comments and questions, because I do want to leave time for Desiree and her presentation. I think hearing all this wonderful stuff that's happening, and imagining how young people or people who need work could take part in this project, in all these amazing projects. And maybe just before we move on to Desiree, I wanted to just ask you, Heather, if you see a space to enable a job guarantee to work in the type of work that you're doing in the council and all the great things that you're putting into place, can you see a job guarantee working as part of that?
Absolutely. I think, as Cassy said, a job guarantee needs to be federally funded, but local government, because they are the closest to the people and are the deliverer of many, many services, are really beautifully positioned to take people within a job guarantee and be able to find really meaningful work for them. So, yeah.
Meaningful and excellent.
Yes, and working towards, a better future. So, I'm really excited about the prospect, and I definitely think local government's got a huge part to play in it.
100%. Thank you, Heather. That's really great.
Yeah.
I hope we can find time to answer some of these questions at the end, but I will hand over, I'll just quickly introduce Desiree next. So, because I just looked at the time and we've already been chatting for an hour. Amazing. So our third speaker tonight is Desiree Kai. Desiree is the organising lead and co-founder of the Tomorrow Movement, which is a group of young people campaigning for a climate jobs guarantee. Desiree is an organiser and a campaigner. She has a background in student activism, and she actually worked with me at Get Up for a little while in 2019, 2020. And at this time, this was a really rough time to be an activist, I feel. I don't know if you agree, Desiree, but this was when Australia was we were reeling from the horrific bushfires fueled by climate change. And then before we could even sort of come to terms with that, we were straight into coronavirus and having to deal with all the change and challenge that brought to us. So I think, like, in that moment, it really brought home to me how climate justice and economic fairness are really two sides of the same coin. And young people understand this even better because, well, I guess they're the ones that are disproportionately impacted by climate change and rising inequality. So Desiree is going to talk to us about the Tomorrow Movement and the great work that she's been doing. And the Tomorrow Movement is an unstoppable movement of young people fighting for a society with good jobs, great public services, and a safe climate for all. Who wouldn't want to be part of that? Excellent. So Desiree, I'll hand over to you.
Thanks so much, Gabby. And yeah, it's really exciting to be here. And I think, incredible to hear also from like Cassy and Heather about all the like local, scalable environmental work on a state level and on a council level. And of course, like there was a question, like a comment and question in the chat about, how do we get the federal funding for these sorts of really great, big scalable job sort of opportunities to solve climate change. And yeah, that's what we're trying to do, right? We're a campaigning organization building a movement of young people. And I'll tell you guys a little bit about our plan to win the political change and the popular support for policies like a climate jobs guarantee, and give you a bit of background of like, how we came to be here and like what we think are the next steps going forward. And like, how in Australia in this political environment, we might be able to go and, get a jobs guarantee on the political agenda and even implemented. So maybe I'll introduce myself a bit, and I might just first also acknowledge country that I'm here on Melbourne or Naarm, on the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and want to pay my respects to those Indigenous people who have inhabited this land for many, time in such a long time before anyone else got here. And yeah, the basis of like a lot of our work campaigning for climate and economic justice in Australia, we really have to acknowledge that at the root of it, this country was founded on colonization and the exploitation of the natural resources and the people on this country. And so there is no ultimately justice without First Nations justice as well. And so Gabby, thank you for the introduction. And so we talk about, co-founders of the Tomorrow Movement. I'm one of 13 young people who founded the Tomorrow Movement. We basically came together as a bunch of young people who were quite disillusioned with the state of the world and also of politics in Australia, and looking at sort of the climate movement in Australia and maybe also like the intersectional problems that we all faced. Young people, we talk about like young people's mental health crisis, the jobs crisis, obviously climate change is on the forefront of our minds. Just like generational equality as well. Like often a thing that we talk about in Australia is how, this generation of young people is the first who won't be able to afford a home where their parents could, these sorts of things. So we saw all these crises, particularly the dual climate and economic crisis, and saw how they intersect so strongly that like we came up with the movement. We decided, to basically make a 5-year plan, a 5-year strategy of how to win a better society. And that's kind of how we got to campaigning about a jobs guarantee, what we call a climate jobs guarantee, but it's, the same thing, right? And so, Gabby, you're talking about in that moment of time in 2020 when we launched the Tomorrow Movement just like over a year ago, and that was in the midst of the pandemic, actually like that first lockdown in Australia where everyone was sort of at home. And so we launched this movement really in this time that was demonstrative of all the sort of issues that young people face on a really tangible, immediate level. And then we also have, the climate crisis like kind of here with the bushfires just before, but also like, thinking about our futures and all that. I might talk a little bit about like what we mean when we talk about a climate jobs guarantee. And so I have a few slides too. I'll see if I can share them. And here we go. can folks let me know if you can see that? Oh, I can see that up there right now. Awesome. Sweet. So we have like these 5 criteria, and I'm sure like I know that Gabby, you know, with the sustainable jobs like group, you know, also have a bunch of criteria, and a lot of them are like quite similar, but we want to make sure that they're good jobs for everyone who wants one. So that's the guarantee part. Urgent coordinated action to solve the climate crisis, as the climate part suggests. We talk about meaningful work, which, you know, Heather has also touched on in like talking about the kinds of jobs that people want, and yeah, that cares for our communities as decided about by our communities. And so when you look at like that local level of like councils, you know, that's what we're talking about. We want them to be public service jobs in the hand of the public, and also regardless of whether you work or not. In Australia, you know, the sort of unemployment payments that we have are way below the poverty line, so we want a living income for all, whether you work or not. These are like kind of our criteria. And this is like the story that we tell about the climate jobs guarantee, which is, you know, it's quite simple. And I think I've also seen comments in the session today about like, you know, this should be a popular policy, and it should be, and we really have to do a good job of articulating why. But a climate jobs guarantee, very simply, will solve the climate crisis. We could start taking action immediately to do that. We could end unemployment and get our economy back on track. And obviously that's a story that's really, really relevant in the time of coronavirus. And, you know, a climate jobs guarantee will prepare us for climate disasters. Thinking back to the bushfires, to some like flooding that we had in New South Wales, you know, in the past year, all these climate impacts that we're feeling already, we can deal with them and be prepared with a climate jobs guarantee. And so most recently, we actually did a survey. Oh, if that will load. Here we go. Whoopsies. Okay. We ran this survey, and actually this is very recent news. We just launched this report maybe a week or two ago, where we interviewed a few hundred young people, or surveyed them rather, to ask them about their experience of jobs as young people and their hopes and aspirations for the future. And, you know, we found that 94% of young people supported Tomorrow Movement's proposal for a climate jobs guarantee. So all that I just like went through before. So what do we call it? A climate jobs guarantee to create stable public jobs for everyone who needs one in areas that serve the community's needs, from renewable energy to housing and health services. And so, you know, the jobs that we need aren't just like those classic, you know, planting trees and like solar, although those are all really incredibly important. We also have jobs in like childcare and teaching and nursing. All those things are really important for building the like big, beautiful, like zero carbon economy and world that, you know, is just and that we're fighting for. This other graph is an interesting one. We asked respondents, you know, what is the industry that you would rank first, and we'd ask them to prioritize the sort of industries that they think that the, you know, if the government created a bunch of jobs, what should they be in? We got renewable energy up top, which is really not surprising, followed by education and healthcare as kind of like the top 3, and fossil fuel industry is last by a long shot, which I don't think will be surprising to anyone. I think some other of like the key findings from that survey were just that, you know, young people are experiencing employment stress at really, really high levels. So we found 65% of those respondents were like either unemployed or in insecure work or looking for more work. And also for those who are unemployed, the main barrier was that there are just aren't enough jobs, basically. And so I think for young people, we're often told, yeah, the reason why you don't have work is because you're not working hard enough, or you need to get this extra bit of education. And the reality is just that there's not enough jobs, and the government has failed to provide them. And we could solve both crises at once, right? We could have a bunch of good jobs created, doing work that we immediately need to start tackling climate change. And so the other thing we did ask was also, we used the example of like a European youth jobs guarantee. And yeah, using that example, we found that like, you know, 60% of the young people surveyed thought that a program like that would have improved their own personal situations. And so we can see that there would be a really tangible impact of a policy like a jobs guarantee in the immediate lives of like a lot of people. And so we want to use this survey to push the conversation forward. We've been talking to members of parliament and trying to basically, this is like one piece of a very large sort of project to build the case for public popular support of a climate jobs guarantee. And so that's what we'll like be continuing to use the survey to do into the future. And so I might actually just talk a bit about like what our plan to win is. And yeah, this is a photo of some of like the actions that we've done. So this was actually just around the time when the government was, we were in the middle of the pandemic and the government was going to cut a bunch of income support that they had offered. This is like in September last year. Yeah, and you know, we had this whole story around the pandemic that, oh, we just want to go back to normal, but actually like our story was that there's no turning back to what was normal before the pandemic, because that was pretty bad for young people, for young people's employment, but as well as like, you know, thinking about the impending climate crisis that no one's kind of like dealt with and kind of forgotten during coronavirus times. But yeah, so we do have a 5-year strategy, and we're basically trying to build a mass movement of young people taking bold action to get the climate jobs guarantee out there and to make it a really popular idea. And I think we're in really good company on this sort of call, right? Where we have a lot of people who are really supportive of a jobs guarantee and of these sorts of like policies that will make the world better, these like jobs, right? That'll help people immediately and also like our planet and our future. But I think for a large number of people in the general public, they have just never heard of the idea. And so there is just a really big role and that we're trying to play as a movement of young people of like building that mass popular support to get the climate jobs guarantee to be a thing that people even think about as a potential solution, to be within the realm of possibility. And so, yeah, we have these sort of 3 pillars of like how we think we're going to win a climate jobs guarantee, and it's sort of a 5-year strategy, and we'll reassess again in 5 years and see how much closer we are to winning a climate jobs guarantee. But of course, we don't have very much time. Yeah, the first pillar is building that mass movement, getting popular public support. The second sort of pillar of what we want to do is also what we call political alignment. And I think this is sort of the idea that within Australia's current political system with the 2 dominant parties, we don't have a lot of people or politicians in the major parties who like we can even see championing an idea like a jobs guarantee. And you have like obviously like fantastic Greens politicians like Cassy and like doing work, you know, on a state level, but widely on a national level, there's no clear path to, you know, winning a government who will actually support such a policy like the jobs guarantee. And so part of like what we're trying to grapple with is figuring out how to win the political power in this like 2-party system to, you know, make a jobs guarantee actually happen. And so it's actually really exciting to be on this panel also to hear about, you know, some of the ways that like I think our platform of a climate jobs guarantee that Tomorrow Movement talks about is like really big and really just maybe seems implausible for policymakers as like being maybe too big, and to see the ways that it can be broken down in like a state level or a local level is really exciting as well. And I think there's a bunch of work that like the whole movement in Australia should be like working towards like, you know, doing that sort of stuff together. But yes, this idea of political alignment that I started talking about, I think we have a dominant sort of status quo or common sense in our politics at the moment. And I think that it would be our analysis within Tomorrow Movement of it is that we currently have a big business sort of political alignment. So all the people who hold the power, who hold the dominant narratives in society around politics, generally align with, you know, thinking about the profits of like big companies rather than individuals and our futures. And we talk about the need to build a people's alignment. And so how can we get movements like the environment movement and the union movement and racial justice and First Nations movements and maybe like social justice and women's movements to all work together to form a new dominant common sense in society that, rather than being driven by profits and such, are actually driven by, you know, care and compassion for each other, for our planet, for community.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I just pause for a second, Desiree, because I'm just remembering in Cassy's the speech that I read out from Cassy was saying that you know 30, well, no, longer than that, but in the past we have actually had full employment in Australia. So you know, in the 1970s, anyone who wanted a job could essentially get one. So we're not actually trying to we're trying to invent something out of nothing. But if you look back far enough, it's already there.
Completely. And I think we look at like stories around things like the post-war sort of reconstruction and look at those sorts of narratives of like where like countries like Australia have really invested deeply in creating new jobs and building the infrastructure needed for society, and look at like those sorts of ideas with real hope. I actually had a few more pictures because
go for
this
it.
is just like, you know, some of the actions that we're doing, using politics as a stage really to ask and demand for better, and using our voices like young people with this like sort of moral urgency. You know, you can see what we're saying, whose side are you on, and like where is your plan for our future? These sorts of things. Just like these cool pictures, like whose side are you on? And I'm always just talking about a climate jobs guarantee. I might stop sharing the screen. And that's like basically the end of I think what I wanted to say really about what we're trying to do. But it is really exciting to be in this room with all you guys who are also thinking about this stuff in the Australian context. And I think we have a little way to go, but such an important part of what I think we all should be trying to do is figuring out how to talk about this policy in a way that, because we know that a jobs guarantee will make people's lives better immediately and into the future. It's just a matter of how we get that message out there, and we have to continue saying that thing. I might, if you might indulge me, I might just share in the chat also a link to our petition for the climate jobs guarantee that we're trying to get support behind. So if anybody would like to support
Please
that.
do. Yeah, absolutely. I had quickly made a list of allies around Australia in other groups that are campaigning for a jobs guarantee, not perhaps the exact same format as we're talking about, but who are kind of on the same page, or at least pointing in the same direction. So I might just quickly go through them to acknowledge the work that other groups are doing in this space, because, you know, we've had the three panelists tonight, but there's also lots of other work happening out there in Australia for those of you who are listening in from other countries. So I wanted to mention that Young Labor, all but one state Young Labor branches have endorsed a plan for full employment. So if you want to look up Young Labor for full employment, you can find the great work that they're doing. I think we're still waiting on New South Wales as far as I know, but hopefully, fingers crossed, get everybody in you know, united across the whole country. There's also a fantastic generation of young economists in the Labor Party. I'd like to acknowledge Lachlan McCall, who's on the Zoom in the chat tonight. Had a great question about how do we work better with unions, which we might come to later. Acknowledge the Australian Greens have a policy for a job guarantee for people under the age of 30, and we've definitely you know, we know that they're open to discussing a job guarantee for everyone. Acknowledging the work of Professor Bill Mitchell and the Centre for Full Employment and Equity, which have been campaigning for talking about this for a very long time. Indigenous leader and Conservative politician Noel Pearson is in favour of a job guarantee. Again, there's like nuances about the type of program that he's campaigning for, but pointing in the same direction, more or less. There's also a new political party on the scene, the New Liberals, and their lead Senate candidate in New South Wales is economist Professor Steve Keen, and they have a policy for a job guarantee for everyone. There's the Unemployed Workers Union. There's our progressive campaigning group, Get Up, which ran a fantastic campaign a few years ago, Future to Fight For, which if you want to look that up, you can just Google Future to Fight For and you'll find some really fantastic ideas for how we could make Australia like a leader in these initiatives. And then just as a very brief mention, I'd like to shout out to my group and my volunteers, the Sustainable Prosperity Action Group. There's these people doing real grassroots work, going out there and giving public talks at the Festival of Climate Action. They've developed their own materials. They're fundraising to get Stephanie Kelton's book, The Deficit Myth, into the hands of more decision makers, and doing some really fantastic work to, like you are doing, Desiree, build the public support from kind of the grassroots. And there's also like really big allies in the climate sector organisations that, although they're not talking about a job guarantee with capital letters, they're definitely linking climate action and jobs. So if you look at Beyond Zero Emissions, they have a 1 million jobs plan. Clean Energy Council, the Climate Council, a lot of these groups are definitely talking about, and the Australia Institute, they're all talking about the same types of things. So I think there is a bit of a groundswell. I would like to hope that there is a bit of a groundswell in Australia, and that the pandemic has kind of opened people's eyes as to what is possible. And of course, there's economics questions around this, but I think definitely at the beginning of the pandemic, when support for people who were unemployed magically rose above the poverty line, and no, we don't have to pay this back in future generations, and yes, we could keep doing it pretty much indefinitely, provide that proper level of support to everyone. I think that really has opened people's eyes as to what's possible. I don't know if, Stephen, you have anything to weigh in at this point.
You're doing a great job, Gabby. I would just like to add, because we're going to run out of time very soon, that actually Gabby Bond has been a significant force. She just doesn't realise it. You don't realise how important that conference was that you organised at the beginning of last year. With Stephanie and Bill Mitchell and some of the people who've been watching were at that conference, and a lot has come out of that conference. I think that Gabby has had at least a small impact, even though she may not be aware of it, on the policy of the Australian Greens, indirectly. So I would like to that long list, I would like to say, if we had another 100 Gabby Bonds in Australia, then we could change the country.
Well, I think we've got, thank you so much. I think we've got 3 amazing advocates in our speakers tonight. And we are almost out of time. So there's a ton of questions. I'm not really sure which one to pick, but it's probably a little bit out of our area of expertise, but I wondered if people had thoughts about engaging with the union movement, because I feel that is a really important thing and one that we're not doing enough of. I don't know, Desiree, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I think, and I agree that it's really important that we engage with the union movement, not only because I talked about the political alignment that we're trying to build, but also if Labor is going to be one of our, one of the 2 political parties and probably the more likely one to adopt a jobs guarantee, Labor and unions and the Labor Party itself are so inherently tied together that I think if unions come on board, it's also more likely that Labor will, and perhaps vice versa. And I think, part of me kind of thinks that we just keep having the conversations with unions, but I've also heard from like various MPs and in other advocacy that, you know, maybe it is a bit of a hard slog to get there, but it's definitely really important, and I think it's just clear that like if we are singing from the same songbook as a whole movement with like the environmental sector and also the unions and then also other movements for justice, like that's when we will start winning in this country. So it's incredibly important.
Yeah. Cassy, do you have thoughts about the union movement? Oh, sorry, you're on mute. I'll just see if I can fix that. You got it? Just a second.
Yeah,
Right.
got it. Yeah, I agree with Desiree. It is a tricky one because the union movement has historically been so glued to the Labor Party. Interestingly, we've just had a fracture down here of the health and community sector union from the Labor Party, but I don't know how long that'll last. But I think, I mean, I always think that you need to have a sort of a mutually beneficial framework, and we're seeing that the union movement has its own challenges because there's so much insecure work and so fewer people join unions. And I think, you know, the movement for a job guarantee, political parties who want to work with the union movement, I think, need to acknowledge that they also need to support unions and union membership. So you know, you can't have one-way relationships here. And the other thing, even though it's, you know, if for unions, it is terrific if they build strong alliances with those civil society groups. But I think the other thing, going back to what Desiree was saying before, in terms of how you change politics in Australia, and we know it's in a terrible place at the moment, and you're seeing this sort of competitive authoritarianism, and Labor, who I used to work for, just not being the party that they were. So I think in terms of where you can have most effect is if you're sort of targeting the Senate in the first instance, because if you can change the Senate, so the government of the day doesn't have control of the Senate, and you've got a good mix in there, and you definitely need Greens in there, you can really start to change the country. So you know, we shouldn't lose sight of the importance of the Senate in Australia and how people tend, and it's a different kind of vote in the Senate. You know, people vote one Labor, two Green, or, you know, one Labor downstairs and Greens upstairs, or some other mix. So I do think the Senate's worth a focus.
Yeah. And yeah, I think there's a bit of a, well, I don't know because I'm not inside it, but it seems like young people in the Labor Party are much more open to, you know, these kinds of big ideas, and are hopefully pushing for that to get taken up in a big way. And with that, we're right on finishing time. So I think we might round it up there. And I just wanted to thank the three of you so much. And thank you, Stephen, for jumping in and answering questions and helping me run this excellent show. And thank you to the Global Forum on Democratising Work and our organising staff and all the volunteers who made this conference possible. This is fantastic, and I've really enjoyed listening into some of the other sessions, and I'd urge everybody to use that registration link. Now that you've done it, jump on some other panels and listen to them and listen to what people are chatting about in other parts of the world. It's fantastic, and I'm really happy that we could play a part in it, and sorry we didn't get to everyone's question.